off with?
Nope, I got nothing.
All right, cool. So were there any games this past weekend?
Nope.
Nothing. Okay. All right. So I kind of want to build off of what we went through last week. I saw a really cool tweet today from another like mental performance counselor, and I thought it was really fitting, especially as we're doing these meetings on Monday leading into the week. We talked about goals last week and had you guys kind of start setting your goals. Building off of that, I think something that could be really useful for y'all is to set up like a weekly goal. You know what your schedule looks like for the week, what days practices are, when you have games. You know what you're working on kind of a macro scale with your long-term goals. And I think, again, continuing to build that route for yourself on how you can achieve that goal. Think about what you want to accomplish this week. And I want you guys to try to take this week to week. So I'm going to give you kind of the same task. I want you to think within, doesn't have to be, directly related to your big goal that we talked about last week, but I want you to think about what you want to focus and accomplish for this week. What do you want to work on? Do you have anything specific that you're going to set yourself up for? Whether it be, and again, you can have multiples. You can think, as a hitter, if you pitch as well on the mound defensively, there's something base running, anything like that, built around kind of what the plan is for this week with practice and games. I want you to think about that. So just take a minute, and you don't have to necessarily write it down right now, but I want to give you, 30 seconds, 45 seconds to think about, like, what do you want to accomplish this week? What's your direction for this week? So just take a second and think about that. If you guys have any questions about it, like you need further explanation or elaboration, let me know. All right. So just wanted to give you a minute to kind of collect your thoughts. I want you to keep thinking about that as we go through the talk tonight, even through the rest of the night into whenever the first day of practice is. I'm guessing probably tomorrow for the week, whenever y'all practice again. Like, have that in mind and remind yourself as you go into practice, this is what I want to do. This is where my motivation or my drive or my intent, all those things we've talked about, that's where I'm going. Do y'all have any questions, anything from last week, from over the weekend that you wanted to bring up? I've kind of got an idea of what I want to talk about tonight, but I want to give you you all the floor if you have any questions or anything that you wanted to talk about to start off. All right. Do we have anybody that wasn't here, like wasn't in the meeting last week? Okay.
I see a couple.
Mace, is it just you? I'm going to kind of look through and see. Logan, yeah. Okay. I think everybody else was in there. All right. Do y'all have any questions about last week? Like, I know Ryan posted the video earlier of kind of what we talked about, but do y'all have any questions about setting yourself up for the fall, anything like that? Okay. All right. So the discussion I want to have this week, and I think this is going to help really build into the rest of the fall, is I want to be really clear about how we define certain things that we're going to talk about through the fall, mainly success and failure. That's obviously what we measure ourselves on through everything that we do. We talked a lot last week about making sure that we're measuring our progress and the goals that you set. So I want to talk more about this kind of definition of what success is versus what failure is, and how we interpret and how we internalize those things. So let's just go in general. Like, how do you define success for yourself in whatever it is? It doesn't have to be super specific, but like, how do you define if you've been successful? Go ahead, Preston.
I would just say, like, if I improve on something I've been working on in practice, or like I successfully work on something mentally that I've been pursuing, or just like find the little things.
Good. That's a good piece. Like, and you're kind of in this definition. You're talking about how you're able to measure it too. So seeing progress, like what does that progress look like? How do you define that progress? Especially, with this idea of mental skills, how we talk about mental skills, what does progress look like? Does it mean that I'm using it daily? Is I'm using it as much as I can? Do I feel more comfortable with it? Do I have a better understanding of it? So that's an important piece as you're defining what these goals are that you're setting for yourself through the fall, through the season, each week, each practice, whatever the case may be, is defining what success looks like. You can even whittle it down, like, what do I want this round in the cage to look like? What is success in terms of this round in the cage? Is it, I don't know, whatever that might be, right? Depending on what you're working on. Others, how do you define success? Like, what's your personal definition of success? Go ahead, George.
I'd just say, like, accomplishing one of my goals.
How do you know if you've accomplished it?
Well, if it's something that's like measurable and you just can tell, like, it's a number and you've made that number.
What if it's something a little bit less like objective? Do you solely stick to goals that you can measure that are data based?
Well, no, I think also a lot of stuff is just like mentally and how you feel about things. So if you are just feeling positive about something, that can be successful, I think.
Good. I like that idea of like the feeling of it, right? That's not something that we can necessarily measure. There's no objective output of how we feel to a degree, but we know what success feels like. We know what a good round or what a good rep feels like. And sometimes that's enough. I think, and Ryan, I'm sure you can speak to this too. I know as a coach, I can get so locked in on these like mechanical things and how you're moving and what your body looks like, where I expect it to look a certain way, but I have to remind myself, like, what does it feel like for you? Did that feel like a good swing? Did that feel like the ball came out of your hand well? Does it feel like your feet are moving the way that you should, like you're on time? That can be so much more important in terms of being successful than something that maybe I want you to do or your coach wants you to do. So that's a really good point, and being honest with yourself about, was that successful? Do I feel good about what I just did? Anybody else? What about failure? We didn't touch too much on this over the summer. We kind of talked about it in one of our first couple meetings, but how do you define failure? How do you know if you failed? What does failure even mean? Go ahead, Pete.
I mean, to be honest, sometimes failure is good because it allows you to evaluate certain things. And like, if you stop thinking of failure as such a negative thing and just like look at it as you have a chance to improve or evaluate what you've been doing, it's a lot easier to fail.
How easy is it for you to think of failure in that way?
It's not very easy at all, especially in the game of baseball where you fail all the time. So, like, yeah, as you're saying, it's easy to say it now, but as soon as you're in the situation, it's like extremely hard to say failures are okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Preston. Who else? Preston mentioned failure can be a good thing. Who agrees? Who thinks failure can be a good thing for you? Hopefully everybody. One of my favorite things to do with teams or athletes or whoever that I work with is kind of visualizing what the path to success looks like, what the path to our goal looks like. We often think of it's a straight line. Like we start at one point and then we go through and we get to success, and that's what it looks like, right? And anything in between that's not success is no longer on that path. So there's only one way to do it. If I want to, if I'm at bat, my success is I got a hit or whatever I define that as. Anything else outside of that is failure in that, right? And I can no longer be successful if I have failed. That's a really hard thing to get around, is the fact that failure is part of the route to success. If you never experience failure, then you're never really challenging yourself. You never get to a point where you can see what your potential really is. This has kind of been a little bit of a change in the last, I would say, probably 10 to 15 years in terms of practice design. And it's really taken hold, the last maybe 4 or 5 years of the challenge of practice and coaches trying to make practice more challenging than games. So people can experience failure. They can experience what failure looks like and then try to rebound from that. Am I pausing for anybody?
Yeah,
Okay.
It's a little choppy.
Okay. I'm going to try, let me see. Okay. We've had some internet issues the last week at my house, so hopefully it'll come through. If it starts messing up, just kind of, I don't know, try to like stop me or something like that. But I think kind of getting back, that piece of what failure means becomes really important. So let's define failure now. We know what the value of it is, but how do you define failure? What are your thoughts around this idea of failure? Let me ask it this way, actually. This is maybe a better route. How many of you try to avoid failure at all costs? Like when you're in a city, especially in a game, like a performance situation, not necessarily practice, but when it matters, right? How many of you do everything you can to try to avoid failure? Probably quite a few. And that's almost in a way how we've been taught, right? We're not supposed to fail when we perform, because if we fail when we perform, then we can't have success. Oftentimes they feel like two ends of the spectrum, right? Which is not the case. I remember one of my favorite things that I've read about, like the approach, is what Manny Ramirez used to do at the plate. Some of you may have heard this, but Manny would set up later at bats in the game in his first early at bats by taking these horrific looking swings at pitches, a foot out of the zone, or he'd be way off time, in a way to kind of set up success later on. Swing and a miss can be considered failure, but he did it in a way that it was useful for him. Pitchers do this a lot. Greg Maddux used to throw 2-0 changeups right down the middle to try to get guys to hit them as hard as they can, because he knew they would pull them foul. Like this is kind of a reconceptualization of what failure is and how we can use failure in a game. What do you think happens when we try to avoid failure at all costs in a performance setting, in the middle of a game, in an at-bat, on the mound, whatever the case may be? What happens when we try to avoid failure? Go ahead, Joe.
When we try to avoid failure, there's a higher chance of failure, because we're trying to make ourselves more perfect than we are.
That's a great point. We try to avoid it, and we end up bringing failure more into the equation. What else? Even personally, like when you've gone through, you guys that raised your hands, these instances that you've tried to make sure you've avoided failure, what has happened in those situations? Go ahead, Tony.
I think that thinking about failing is the exact way you're gonna fail. Like for me personally, like when there's like a pressure moment or like something needs to be done, like you just got to think about that and like think about how kind of like self-talk, which I know we've talked about like in the summer, and like being confident and like knowing you're gonna do it. I feel like that really helps. But as soon as you let like failure sneak into your mind, like I feel like that's gonna kill you.
Yeah. What does that feel like mentally for you, Tony, when you feel like you're focusing on failure? Like what thoughts go through your mind? What do you tell yourself?
It's kind of like, it's a lot of don'ts, like don't do this, don't do that. Like basically nothing that's really good for confidence or positive.
Yeah, that happens a lot. You may experience this in class settings. Your teachers may have told you this. I know I've done this as a coach in the past, where I tell kids not to do something. Don't do that. I have a 6-year-old. I tell her don't do that all the time because she's always getting into things she shouldn't. What do we know about the idea? Well, I shouldn't say it that way. We talked a little bit about this over the summer. But if anybody can remember, what did we talk about how the brain works when we try to not do something, or we hear the word don't? What does our brain do? If anybody can remember. Go ahead, Preston.
Thinks about like what you're not supposed to do.
Exactly, right? Our brain operates in an active manner. So whatever we're thinking about don't do something. Well, immediately we think about that thing that we don't do, and then we try to think about what we should do instead. That's a longer process. Our brain works fast, but we're talking, in the game, we're talking fractions of a second, half a second, quarter of a second, where we've got to be able to be there and make a play or do whatever it is that we need to do. If we're thinking, don't do this, well, then now we've got to think, okay, I'm thinking of doing that. No, wait, I don't do that. Now what do I do? And you've got to create a plan now at that point, on the spot, in the moment. It's a longer process. It's much more difficult to do. So this is what can happen when you experience negative consequences from failure. You have coaches yell at you, your parents yell at you, your teammates yell at you, you yell at yourself when you fail. Now you're in that mode of, okay, I can't do this anymore, so I'm going to do everything I can not to do this thing. And now you're thinking, all right, well, I'm not doing this thing. My brain immediately goes to that thing that I don't want to do, that I'm not trying to do. We did this exercise this summer. But for those of you that weren't around, this is one of my favorite things to do. I'm going to give you a statement, okay? And I want to see where your brain goes. So don't think of a pink elephant. Immediately, what happens? A pink elephant pops into your mind, right? Because that's what you're not trying to think of. Well, your brain doesn't know how to not do something. It doesn't know don't do this. So immediately when you say don't think of a pink elephant, you think the pink elephant and then you try to go somewhere else with it. And it's those little fractions of a second and that extra energy that you have to devote to where your thoughts are going that can make or break, right? This is another piece, Tony, you mentioned self-talk. I used to be a big proponent, and this is kind of something called cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, that used to say, if you have negative self-talk, you have to stop it and turn it into positive self-talk. That used to be the way it worked. Everybody's got to think in a certain way. So it was in this thing of like, all right, don't think bad about myself. Don't say bad things. Well, again, our brain doesn't know how to not do that. So immediately I go to the bad things that I shouldn't be saying about myself. And then I have to try to go to these good things. How many of you experience that? Like you say things to yourself when you don't do what you should have done, when you fail in a moment, you say, oh man, I suck. Oh, what am I doing? I shouldn't have done that. How many of you guys go to that? Everybody, man. Everybody does. It's natural. That's the way, honestly, it's the way our culture kind of raises us to be. What I want you to focus on, again, is this idea of what does that mean? It's kind of, again, built around this idea of failure. We failed. It's going to happen. What does that ultimately mean about who we are as a baseball player, who we are as a person, what's going to happen next, what might happen, all of these things? We have definitions about what these look like. Right? We've gone through this. We've gone through the experiences that tell us what happens when we fail, and these are the outcomes from it. One big piece that you can work on from this, if you really struggle with this, is practicing acceptance of it. We're going to fail, right? We know that. Everybody knows that. Nobody's perfect. Nobody ever has been, especially in terms of performance. We know we're going to, okay? What can we do about that? What can we do when we have negative thoughts, when we dog cuss ourselves, when we tell ourselves that we're the worst? With acceptance, doesn't mean that you can't do that, because we know that we're going to. What it means is that we understand that that's going to happen, but we understand that it doesn't mean anything. The things that we tell ourselves don't have to mean anything. We place power in it, but we don't have to. It's the same with failure. Failure doesn't have to mean anything. We place expectations on ourselves, or we get expectations placed on ourselves with what failure means. So this has been kind of a tangent in a roundabout way, but what I want you to really focus on is, what does failure mean to you? How are you going to conceptualize failure, either in practice, in games, at school, in relationships, whatever? How are you going to conceptualize that? There's typically two ways that we can do that. We take it as, well, I failed this time. I am a failure. I internalize it. I'm always going to fail. We catastrophize, right? And that leads to poor confidence, struggles in performance, all of the things that we want to avoid. Or we can look at it as the process of learning, the process of success. I failed this time. I knew I was going to fail at some point. What can I learn from that to apply and move forward? Again, getting out of that, get out of the don't fail, right? Get out of that mindset of thinking don't fail. Take the information. All right, what do I need to do next time? Even if it's the wrong thing, even if it's not the thing that you should be doing, taking the information and putting it into an active space of, I'm going to do this, you're still more likely to succeed. We talk about this a lot in pitch calling. Yeah, sometimes there's the right and the wrong pitch call for a certain situation. But pitchers, you can say this: if you feel conviction in the pitch that you're going to throw, doesn't really matter what it is. If I feel confident in it, I'm probably going to execute it pretty well. I'm probably going to have a pretty good outcome more often than not. Rather than if I went through a sequence and set a guy up perfectly, I threw the high fastball where I want, and I know I can tunnel my breaking ball right out of that, but I don't feel confident that I can throw that pitch, I'm probably not going to execute it well, even though it was maybe the right pitch to throw in that situation. So all of this kind of wraps into, how do you conceptualize failure? How do you conceptualize success? What do those things mean in terms of your progress to your goal? That's kind of where I want your mind going through this week, okay? How do I define success and failure in practice? What do those look like? What information can I take from them? And then what does that do in terms of me reaching my goal for this week, reaching my goal for this year? I gave you a lot of information. It's really difficult to process all of this just kind of in the moment and expect to remember all of it and be able to analyze all of it. So journaling comes in, okay? Keeping track of all of this stuff, keeping track of what your goals are, writing down how you're going to process, how you're going to conceptualize success and failure this week. And again, it can change. There's nothing wrong with that. It can change week to week, day to day, year to year, whatever. So don't feel like you have to have the exact answer right now. Start working toward it. See what you can come up with in terms of, how do I conceptualize this? How do I define what these concepts are? And that's what I really want you guys to take away from this week and continue to build as we continue to meet. Think about this. How do I define success and failure this week? What is my goal for this week? How am I going to achieve it? What happens if I don't achieve it? Have a plan for that too. If I don't achieve my goal this week, what do I need to adjust? Again, is that failure? Sure. But what does that mean in terms of how your progress is? Okay. What does, going 0 for 4 with 4 Ks mean on Saturday? Ultimately, it's information at this point. If you can detach yourself from the emotion of those things, the emotion of those outcomes, and you can kind of almost think of it as science, like this is the data. Okay, how do I use this data to continue to move forward? Any questions, any thoughts around that? Ryan, you have anything to add?
Yeah, just a couple things that I'd heard to echo what you're saying. Okay, one that always really stuck with me was, you don't ever fail. You either succeed or you learn, which is exactly what Graham's talking about, right? With that, he talked about information. That's how we'll approach the fall, especially you guys on the black team that are going to get a lot of hard fact information, right? If you go 0 for 4 with 4 Ks, and after the weekend we can tell you that, hey, all of those swings and misses are on the outer half, right? You may have an offer in the stat line, but now you should be looking inner half, right? That's something you may not have known, but by getting exposed a little bit, okay, and like Graham said, using it as information instead of emotion, that's where it can help you. And then the last piece for me is, in my experience coaching, the guys that try not to fail end up playing very tentatively. Okay, and for you guys that want to play baseball at the highest level you possibly can, okay, being tentative means you get beat. Okay, so keeping that aggressive mindset of I'm attacking the game and I know I'm going to fail, but that's okay, right? And not allowing yourself to get tentative in order to avoid failure that's inevitable, like Graham said. So just a couple extra pieces for me that stuck out there. But hopefully as we get going and we start playing games and we start having some outcomes like Graham's talking about, you're starting to recognize some of those situations and we can talk through them more. So.
And again, it just goes back to how you guys define that. You can find motivational posters and all these things about failure and what it means. One of my favorite things that we tell our guys is if you're going to fail trying to do something great rather than failing in a passive manner, failing because you didn't try. We can get into like an ego, and we can have a whole conversation about ego and identity and all of this stuff that's pretty high level in terms of the psychology of competing. But try to make sure if you're going to fail trying to do something awesome. Like fail trying to make a great play. Fail trying to do something for the team instead of that fear of failure making you tentative and now you fail being a passive observer, right? So anyway, just another thought on that, and we can get more into that later on in the fall if you guys want to have kind of some of those higher level conversations about ego defense and identity formation and what failure means in terms of your identity. We can definitely have those talks. It's probably a little bit much right now, but as we continue to go into the fall. One more chance. Any questions from any of you guys about, something related to tonight? Anything else? Setting yourself up for the week? Take some time tonight, tomorrow to process everything that we talked about. Kind of like class. I recommend taking some notes as you're listening, writing down thoughts that come up as you're going back through it, tonight, through the week, all of that as part of that journal that you have. And just kind of keep thinking about it from time to time. Think about metacognition. Think about what you're thinking. What do you feel? What do you need as a baseball player? What do you need as a person to improve? And if you come up with anything, feel free to reach out. We won't meet next week. My parents are in town for Labor Day, so I'm meeting the guest room in our house, so they'll be down here. So we won't meet next week for Labor Day. We'll be back whatever that next Monday is. I think the 7th or the 6th, something like that. Whatever that date is. So I'll be sure to post that in the group me as well. So no meeting next Monday, and then we're back the following Monday, same time. All right. Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Coach.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Coach.
Thank you.
Thank you, Coach.